Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast.
Hello, Akie, and welcome to today's installment of Star Trek Lower Decks. I've been looking forward to this one.
Have you now? Hello,
Yes.
Stevie. It's me. Why have you been looking forward to this one? Oh, hold on. Let me do that more Shatnery. Hello, Stevie. Why have you been looking forward to this one?
Because Boimler gets a girlfriend, and Mariner is so suspicious of this girlfriend.
And rightly so.
And rightly so.
Yes, Boimler gets a girlfriend. And that's why this episode is entitled Cupid's Errant Arrow. But before we get all carried away, just so people know, today's stardate is
Stardate 315525.8.
And this is Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast. With your hosts, me, Stevie Mans.
me, Akie for me, with your host, me, and me.
Me.
I like that. We should say
Me and me.
with your host, me.
Very
and
meta,
me.
isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's do that going forward.
Yes, we will. We're your hosts.
Whenever I try to be professional with podcasting, it always goes wrong. With your host, me.
With your host, me. You sounded like you were surprised that you were hosting. With your, like you were reading copy, like, this is Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast with your host, me, and me. Yes, we're discussing Season 1, Episode 5 of Star Trek Lower Decks, entitled Cupid's Errant Arrow. And yes, Stevie, Boimler gets a girlfriend.
If but briefly.
If but briefly.
Did we do a... I forgot. Did we do a... We did a Stardate.
We did. I just did it. But then
You did.
we went
Excellent.
all over the place.
We did.
Which
Sorry.
is important. No,
Should-
doesn't matter. I'm always all over the place. That's how we do. I would just like to say this is yet again an episode about that's really... the Cerritos is the fifth character on Lower Decks. You know what I'm saying? Sex and the City, Lower Decks, other movies. It's like this is about the character of the ship, the Cerritos, this episode. But also it's about how unlikely it is that Brad Boimler could have a beautiful, well-adjusted, and successful partner.
Of course. Bradward, as we find out.
Oh, yes, as we learn. Yeah, Bradwards. There's Bradleys, Bradwards. And so, yes, shall we?
Let's run it down.
It's time to run it down.
Can you run it down for me? Tell me what just happened. Can you run it down for me?
Yeah, I'll run it down for you. So this all begins with the crew of the Cerritos. They're in orbit around a planet called Mixtus III. And they're assisting in a controlled demolition of an unstable moon that's about to crash into the planet. And they're providing support for the Vancouver, a Parliament-class ship, which when you see I realize this episode doesn't have a cold open. It just starts with the credits, and then the show is off and running. There's no, weird intro thing. Anyway, the Vancouver looks exactly like the Cerritos, only it's much larger, so it literally eclipses the Cerritos as it comes on the scene into orbit. And so Captain Carol Freeman and Commander Jack Ransom, which I think is how you're supposed to say his name, they're visiting the Vancouver, and the captain of the Vancouver is like, hey, welcome to the bridge. And they're like, oh, see how great this ship is? One day you could command a ship this cool. And obviously Freeman and Ransom bristle at that. However, they're like, fine, that's great, that's wonderful, I'm so glad to be here and help. The captain tells them, we may not be able to do that scheduled controlled demolition because there's a diplomatic problem. The people of Mixtus II and Mixtus III, because they don't want the moon to be demolished, quite frankly. And so Captain Freeman's sort of like, what? Why would there be a diplomatic problem? The moon's going to crash into the surface of the planet. And so she is shown the conference room, the people of Mixtus II and Mixtus III arguing about why the moon can't be demolished. They say it's crucial for the gravity for their summer crops. That a lady says it's been home to their family for generations. And one person even says that it's made up by the government to control them. Ripped from today's headlines. And then since they're all seeing that, Freeman's like, let's get ready to negotiate. Meanwhile, in the lower decks, Brad Boimler. I don't know why I got stuck on Brad Boimler.
Boimler?
That's how you get out of a Boimler loop. Meanwhile, in the lower decks, Boimler's super excited, not only because they're going to get to do this joint project with the Vancouver, but because he has a special lunch date with his new girlfriend, he's been dating for a month, Barbara Brinson. Brad Boimler and Barbara Brinson. Barb and Brad. Boimler and Brinson. A match made in heaven. Anyway, Mariner has been dubious about whether or not this Barbara Brinson exists. Apparently, Boimler has been going on and on about her for the last month. And Mariner's like, okay, listen, I don't even know if this girl's real. And Mariner's like, let me guess, we're going to have to go to the holodeck to meet her. To which Boimler replies, he doesn't do that anymore. That's a little Easter egg giving away. That's an Easter egg for an Easter egg.
Indeed.
And meanwhile, Rutherford and Tendi are performing some repairs when part of the equipment catches fire. And they're talking about how old the Cerritos is, but it's got miles on it. But then they're talking about how sweet the Vancouver is and how it has like a thing that does a thing. And it's all super sexy and beautiful. And notably, they have the new T88s, which is like basically like a tricorder model. And they're like, what? There's no way they can house. They're not even out yet. But apparently they do. So they all take a shuttlecraft on over to the Vancouver for whatever reason. And Tendi and Rutherford immediately run off to look at the heat coils or something. Thermal mesh. They're super excited to be on the ship. They think it's the sexiest and most beautiful thing they've ever seen. They run away. Brad is standing there alone and sad with flowers and a teddy bear. And Mariner comes over and goes, okay, listen, she's like trying to get ready to console him. Like, you don't have to keep up this charade anymore. Even as she's about to do so, Barbara Brinson shows up and they embrace and they kind of kiss and make out and stuff. And Mariner can't believe it. She's like, computer end program. She thinks she's in the holodeck. But they're like, yeah, it's true. And so Brinson gives them like a little tour of the Vancouver. And they talk about how they met and how she'd never get into a long distance relationship. But that Boimler exudes some kind of like just this I don't know, something that she can't resist. And so she's super into him. Then another crew member from the Cerritos, Lieutenant Jet, shows up. And he's like, hey, we're working together. And he's like tall and handsome. And he's got a nice deep voice. And he's all like, hey, blah, 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 blah. And he and Barbara Brinson have a little bit of a rapport, as the French say. And they're going to be working together. And he's like, hey, I'll try not to make it go downtown. They do a little playful sort of hitting. And I would say Bradford gets a little worried about it, but it seems like it all works out. And then Tendi and Rutherford report to the lieutenant commander on board the Vancouver, and he gives them orders to come up with some alternative solutions for the moon implosion problem. He tells them they got to run some diagnostics in the simulation mainframe, and he says he gives each of them a T-88, and he says whoever gets done first gets to keep their T-88. And so they go flying off because they want to keep their new cool stuff. Meanwhile, back on the Cerritos, Mariner is really feeling weird about Brinson, and Boimler is really feeling weird about Jet. And Mariner feels like something's going on with Barbara Brinson, that maybe it's too good to be true and that she might be like an alien disguised as a human that's trying to do something to Boimler. Boimler's all upset about it. Mariner, the experience that Mariner has where she's docked at Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine.
I heard you.
Okay. And our listeners could hear your eyebrows raising.
My eyebrows are not so hairy that you can hear them raise.
It was the weight with which they raised. Anyway, an incident with two of her friends, and it's cute. It's Angie and Nico. She's saying they make a cute couple, and Nico's like, oh, it's nothing special. They were great friends, and they became whatever. And Mariner's like, you're a great guy. And he says, she says that either he's a great guy or he's a Harvonian shape changer, and he turns into a big, monstrous, I presume, Harvonian shape changer, and immediately eats Angie. And that's Mariner's experience, and she vows that she will not let that happen to Boimler. So this whole time, Freeman is like trying to get these people to agree, and they're being completely ridiculous. She's coming up with all these like diplomatic plans for Mixtus II and Mixtus III. It was like moving dust for the people who think it's religious, and gravity systems installed for the crops, and the ancestral homes will be relocated, and people are satisfied with the solutions, but one representative will not go for it. Says that the moon blocks pollution from Mixtus III, which otherwise would fall into Mixtus II, and that comes a whole thing. Ransom counters that if they don't store, it's a whole thing, and basically that one person tells Freeman and Ransom that if they destroy the moon, they'll be murderers. Meanwhile, Rutherford and Tendi are basically having like a contest to see who can get all this. They're in the Jeffries tubes, and they're like trying to do all the diagnostics, and they're like super excited at how fast the T-88s are, and they're both fantasizing about bringing their tools back to the ship and being like, I've got a T-88, and everyone on the ship being like, whoa, on the Cerritos. Rutherford sees that Tendi has solved more problems than he, more diagnostics, I guess, than he, and so he uses his cybernetic implants to help him go faster. Mariner, meanwhile, is hanging out with Brinson and Boimler and trying to run all sorts of tests on Brinson on the low to find out what she might be. She thinks she might be a surgically altered Cardassian spy, Deep Space Nine, a transporter clone, or a Suliban. Suliban, that's a deep cut. That's season 1 Enterprise. I mean, no one wants to cut that deep. Am I right?
There was a lot of deep cuts in that, but we'll get to that.
We will. I know you're all over it. She gets a tricorder out to emit a blast that would disrupt her positronic brain in case Brinson was like an android. And then she's going to need an organic sample to figure out what's going on. And so she's going to try to get some like hair or something like that. Meanwhile, the whole thing with Brad and Brinson is that Barbara Brinson has to be working with Jet, and so she's going to meet him later in the mess hall. They don't get to have their lunch on time. Rutherford, my favorite part, where Bradward Googles. I can't believe I said Googles. Where Brad Boimler asks the computer to show him all the cool people from Earth, and then gets a bunch of clothes replicated that will make him look cool, and he looks like the weirdest 90s skater boy fantasy weirdo as he walks into the mess to finally meet Jet, and he acts like a total dweeb and asks the thing for beer. It's great, fantastic, worth watching. Mariner is still freaked out. Meanwhile, the orbital platforms that are holding the things that are keeping the moons from crashing into the planet are too low, and so there's like a catastrophe happening there, but don't worry about it because everyone is still arguing about everything. Boimler basically has to make it up to Barb. I don't even know. I didn't realize I'd have to say Barb and Boimler so many times.
You're struggling with that today.
Boimler, it's just so much B. Boimler, because Boimler's bringing gifts to Barb to make up for the argument that they had. He shows up with gifts, but he hears them inside the Yosemite shuttle talking to each other in a way that sounds sexually suggestive. But it turns out that they're not being sexually suggestive, and he's embarrassed, and he apologizes, and they kiss and make up, and then she invites him to go with her on the shuttle out to do something at the orbital platforms and maybe get a little alone time together. And Brad's like, all right. But little do they know that Mariner tags along. So while they're doing that, Tendi and Rutherford go back to the lieutenant commander's office, Lieutenant Commander Docent, and they report the completion of their duties. And Docent is like, great, you get to keep your T-88s because you're now being officially transferred to the Vancouver because my mom used to live near... Mom? Uh-oh. Aunt? Grandmother?
Oh, aunt. My uncle? Aunt.
I think it's
Let's go with
aunt.
aunt. Super important details here.
Anyway, he's like, you're going to be transferred no matter what. It's an important detail because he's Lieutenant Commander something Docent. And he's like, you're going to be transferred, and that's the end of it. And they're like, no freaking way. They don't want to do with that. Tendi and Rutherford are upset that they're going to be forced to leave the Cerritos. They ask Dosen if they can stay. He gets super upset, which is weird. And said he's already written up the transfer and just needs to send it to the Admiral. Tendi says, you're not allowed to transfer us against our will. And then Dosen says, whatever, my grandmother used to live near her. So Tendi knocks the thing out of his hand, and they pass it back and forth, playing keep away with it. And then they run away with it, and he has to run after them. And eventually he catches up to them, and I forget how it happens, but he accidentally shoots Boimler in the knee in the thing. But then he admits the whole thing is that he wants to get off the Vancouver because being in an elite class ship is super stressful because you're like having to go back in time and deal with like crazy energy aliens, and he just wants to hang out on a ship and do like normal stuff, and that's why he was doing that. But the Tendi and Rutherford are able to sort of leverage the fact that he's behaved so poorly to get him to allow them to go back to the Cerritos, and also give each of them T-88 to take back with them. And that's essentially the end of that story. Meanwhile, Mariner sneaks on the shuttle that Boimler and Barbara are on, and she's trying to sneak in to save Boimler from what she thinks Barbara is. She gets in there only to discover Boimler naked, getting ready to have a little quality time with Barbara. But they argue for a bit, and then because the orbital platforms are dealing with the gravity situation, the ship shakes, Boimler gets knocked out cold. Then Mariner sees Barbara come out, and Mariner and Barbara have it out. They fight, but then they realize that they both get along. They are able to like bond over the fact that Brad Boimler is a complete bozo. See what I did there? Bees. And Barbara allows Mariner to, this is so difficult. This is like HMS Pinafore. Barbara allows Mariner to scan her to determine that she's not a parasite. However, her scan does report that there is a parasite somewhere on the ship. Where? Dun, dun, dun. Oh, it's on Brad. It's just on Brad Boimler. It's in the back of his neck. So they take so apparently he was the one with the parasite. When they take it out and they analyze it, it turns out to be a parasite that makes people more attractive through pheromones, and it pretty much ruins his relationship with Barbara, who basically is like, oh yeah, you know what, I need to focus on my work. It's not you, it's me. And she kisses him on the forehead and she leaves. All is well. When we get to the end, it's Rutherford and Tendi hanging out, and they both have their T-88s, and they both also stole duffel bags full of T-88s. And you know what? Cerritos wins again. That's it. Cupid's Errant Arrow.
Cupid's Errant Arrow with Brad Boimler and Barbara Brinson.
I think it might be time. Oh, Easter eggs. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm in the studio. This is Akie, and we're going now live to Stevie Mans, who is on the scene with some Easter eggs from this week's episode. Stevie!
Thank you, Akie. Thank you, Akie. Great to be here. Great to be here.
So we had a couple of Easter eggs today, as you might be aware. So we had hollow girlfriends. Brad Boimler was joking with Mariner, or Mariner was joking with Brad Boimler about whether or not his new girlfriend was a hollow girlfriend. And he goes, I don't do that anymore. Nicely a throwback to, in fact, two TNG characters, Geordie LaForge as well as Reginald Barclay, who was probably more guilty for it than Geordie. But you love Geordie and Dr. Leah Brahms.
And also, we just rewatched the episode, 7 of 9. Did the same thing with Chakotay.
Yes,
yeah.
With Chakotay. And Riker was probably our first holodeck romancer with this deep cut with, you may remember, Minuet from the episode with the Binars.
That's right.
There was a nice little throwback to TNG with Barb Brinson. She made a comment about 1920s Chicago, which was also a throwback to that holodeck episode where Captain Picard goes back for his leisure time, and he goes into the fictional novel of Dixon Hill.
That's right. I was trying to remember the name. Dixon Hill, yes.
Dixon Hill. And they all get stuck there and whatnot.
Yes, it's wonderful. In period costume.
Indeed. And there was a reference to a rogue hollow character, what was it? A rogue hollow villain or something? And that the first one was when Cyrus Redblock manages to get out of the holodeck from that very episode.
Yes.
And then we end up having and then later on, we get the Moriarty episode where he manages to control the ship with Elementary Dear Data.
That's right.
I believe was the episode.
Fantastico.
Right, so one of my favorite Easter eggs, I think, of the entire series was in this episode where Mariner is trying to work out what is wrong with Barbara Brinson. And she has a conspiracy chart. So they go into a little room and they have a conspiracy chart, and she's got like these red strings going from here to there like it's some sort of FBI investigation. And if you look closely, you can see a ton of things. So obviously a few things are mentioned, like a Suliban, I think, was mentioned. But if you look on the chart, you can see things like, so there's a Suliban, there's even Seska. There's a picture of Seska from Voyager. There is a Dauphin, if you may remember, from TNG with season 1, and it was Wesley Crusher. The Duras sisters are on that board also, which is quite fun. There's also a picture of Data's first daughter, Lal, if you may remember.
Lal, yes.
Lal. And then transporter clones, which I quite liked. There was like a picture of two Barbs and figuring out that perhaps it was the clone. And if you did spot, there was a nice giant picture of a humpback whale. So that was a nice throwback to original series. Or the movie.
That's right.
I forget which one. Star Trek 5, right?
4. Voyage Home.
4.
Right?
5. It was the last, wasn't it the last one?
It was
yes.
The motion picture, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Voyage Home. 4.
Voyage Home. And then Generations was 5.
No. Then there are 2 more original series movies, which I do not recommend.
Really?
Yes.
I thought Voyage Home was the last original series one.
I believe that there are 6 TOS movies and then Generations. If I'm not mistaken.
Good Lord, I really need to up my game.
I don't know if you need to up it to 5 and 6, but you can if you want.
And then the last one was, I think we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about. There was a quote where he said, there were sexy people in rompers who murder you for going on the grass. A nice little throwback to TNG and Wesley Crusher. When all of those sexy people, when they just run everywhere and they wear very little things.
That's right.
And then they were in, Picard had to grapple with the Prime Directive once again as he decided whether or not to let Wesley Crusher die. And I really don't remember how he managed to get out of that, except by beaming them off the planet.
I don't remember either. He must have beamed them off the planet. Or
he did, but I'm sure there's always like a twist where he's not quite breaking the Prime Directive.
Right. I'm wondering if...
But anyway.
We don't need to. We can do a TOS when we want to do 5,000 episodes in a row. We'll start from season 1 and do 7 seasons of TNG.
We've got some watch-alongs planned.
Anyway, thank you very much, Akie. That's everything from the Easter eggs over here, and back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much. Was a true pleasure. Oh, by the way, I did have one Easter egg that we maybe didn't mention because it was visual. When Boimler is on the holodeck waiting for Barbara Brinson the first time, it's easier to say in this voice. He's holding flowers and a teddy bear. The teddy bear is a Geordie bear.
Teddy bear. How did I miss the teddy bear? Sorry, Akie. Akie, you're right. Yep.
You're still the best at what you do. And now, let's go to quotable moments.
Quotable moments.
So many wonderful quotable moments in this. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I only had there were many, and I think some of them for me were my Easter egg moments, but this was a fun one for me. So it's when Boimler he's talking about the old flame of Barbara Brinson's, and he said, that guy is like a Kirk Sunday with Trip Tucker sprinkles. That was my favorite line.
Oh boy. This show's jokes are so nerdy, it's ridiculous. I have a couple lines that I liked a lot. I really enjoyed the part in the beginning when Tendi and Rutherford are fixing the thing, and Rutherford is just lying there with like his feet up, and he's got his hands crossed behind his head, and he says, you smell that, Tendi? Each ship on the fleet has its own scent. I think the Cerritos smells like toasting marshmallows on a cool night. Which I just thought was hilarious. Also, when they find out that there are T-88s on the Vancouver, Tendi says, that's not possible. They're not out yet. It's a starship, not heaven, which I thought was fantastic. And yes, it was Grandma. Wait a second. You can't just transfer us against our will. Psh, watch me. Do I need to remind you who my grandma's neighbor was? I guess I do. It was the Admiral.
Lucky Grandma.
Yeah. My grandma was neighbors with the Admiral. That is so stupid. I really like the Suliban reference because they're such a rando species that really only comes up in Enterprise. But that's neither here nor there. Oh, and the surgically altered Cardassian spy is funny if you've watched a ton of DS9 because everyone is constantly surgically altering their faces to become a Cardassian looking like a Bajoran, a Bajoran looking like a Cardassian so they can all go undercover and kill people. Because Cardassians suck. And that's it. That's Code of Moments. We should move on to next time.
Let's move on.
Set phasers to stats.
Oops. Let's move on to the right sound effect this time.
Next time on Set Phasers.
Next time on Set Phasers, we'll be discussing episode 6 of season 1 of Star Trek Lower Decks, entitled Terminal Provocations. Terminal Provocations. Full disclosure, I have forgotten what that episode is about, so I hope to rewatch it. Do you remember?
Oh, is it Badgie? Do we have our first Badgie episode?
Oh my God, is it the Badgie episode? And I just didn't remember the name. Holy moly, I hope it is.
Because there were 2 Badgie episodes, so if this is, maybe it's the start of our Badgie.
I think if this is the beginning of the
Were there
Badgie
2 or 3?
episode, I think there were 2 because Badgie comes back at like the end, towards the end.
Yeah.
But
The final one, that's
definitely
right.
set up earlier. I think you might be right. There's only 10 episodes, and this is episode 6. This would be when you introduce Badgie. Oh, man.
Yes, terminal provocations, because, he's pretty deadly. As we find out, spoiler.
Spoiler alert. So, yes, next week we'll be discussing Badgie, and that episode is not to be missed. Nor is this episode to be missed. And thank you so much for not missing it. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the program, you can catch us on old episodes of our podcast, but you can also catch us every Monday with new podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. And please rate and subscribe us on Apple Podcasts. Oh, God, what happened to my
Or
mouth?
wherever you get your podcasts.
Please rate us well, but the Apple Podcast one, we'd love a rating there. And write something and maybe we'll read it. Blah, 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 blah.
And yeah, why not dig into the old archive episodes if you are a Trek fan? We're going to cover all of the Treks. Maybe ish. I don't know if we'll end up covering all of Deep Space Nine, but we'll cover the new ones.
500 episodes of Star Trek. We're going to do them all.
Yeah, because we have no friends, no life, and no jobs. I'm just kidding. We are employed.
I consider this great.
It is fun. It is fun regardless. Anyway, if you want to catch us on social media, we have lots of things to keep you entertained with. Lots of meme games and Star Trek things to think about. You can find us on @SetPhasers and @SetPhasers Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
Meme Game Strong.
Thank you. Yes, Meme Game Strong.
That's Stevie. If you want to support us on our continuing mission to discover what Star Trek has in store for us, we'd only be delighted, just delighted. You can patronize us. We can take it by going to patreon.com/setphasers.
Well, until next time, I'm Stevie Mans.
And I'm Barbara Brinson. And this has been Set Phasers, a highly illogical Star Trek podcast.
Computer. End program.